Morning, everyone. I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. I just had a lovely 2 weeks in Europe, and I was just saying how I'm very blessed. I had a great vacation, but I have an equally great life to come back to. So I'm just really grateful and happy. And I love talking about step three. So we're going to pick up at the beginning of chapter 5, how it works. There may be a little overlap from a few weeks ago where I talked about step two, but I think there's such good stuff in here that if I do it again, I'm going to do it again. So, first paragraph in chapter 5, page 658, how it works. I mean, just look at that title. They're telling us it works. And then they're going to tell us how it works, what we need to do. But there's a promise right there that it works. So they start off saying, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who don't recover are people who can't or won't completely give themselves, surrender to this program. That's how it starts out. So they're saying if we want to succeed, we have to thoroughly follow their path, not anyone else's path, their path. So when we hear someone speak, no matter how well they speak, how literate they are, how well they use the turn of a phrase, we always want to make sure that it goes along with what's in this book, that it doesn't contradict what's in this book. And it says, the people who don't recover are people who don't surrender to this program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So then they go ahead and they talk about dishonesty. They say people who are constitutionally incapable aren't at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They're naturally incapable of doing this, grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Okay, so what are they saying here? They're saying a few things. They're saying the people who won't recover are people who are constitutionally incapable of being honest. Well, don't we all want to say that about ourselves and gives ourselves that out? Like, well, I'm unable to be honest. And I'm going to say, I would pretty much gamble to say that not one person here is constitutionally incapable of being honest. So those are people who really, it's like, I almost think like people who hear voices telling them to commit crimes, those who honestly don't know right from wrong. And it says they've been born that way. It's not their fault and they're not going to recover. So if we want to say, well, I'm constitutionally incapable of being honest, we may as well walk away because we're not going to recover. But that is not, I feel again confident to say that is not anyone here. It certainly was not me, even though I was dishonest all the time. I mean, I was thinking back in high school, all my friends had boyfriends and I didn't. I guess, what, 15 years old? So I cut out a picture of this really cute boy from the newspaper and told all my friends that, oh, this was my boyfriend. And then after a while, it's like, okay, they're going to want to meet him. So what do I do? So I just said, oh, he died of a heroin overdose. I mean, it was just like I wasn't constitutionally incapable of being honest. I just didn't want to because being dishonest got me what I want, like acceptance from my friends, or it got me out of things I didn't want, right? If in college I didn't turn in a paper, it was like, oh, I got mugged. That's why I didn't do it. I wanted to avoid consequences. So we lie either to get something we want or to get out of consequences that we don't want. But I'll tell you my experience when I got a sponsor, and again, I was desperate, right? This illness beats us into a state of reasonableness. And my sponsor said to me, the first lie you tell, we're done. I mean, that's pretty strict. And I just said, okay. And then I just said about monitoring every word I said. And if I happened to say something that was dishonest, I would right away say, wait, what I just said, that wasn't true. And then after a while of doing this, God really changed my heart so that I'm not dishonest. And I guess I would say I'm not ever dishonest. I cannot say that about my other character defects. I cannot say I never get resentful or I never get prideful, but I can say I am never dishonest. That is 100% within our control to be rigorously honest. So, what do they tell us? This manner of living, working this program, demands rigorous honesty. Not a suggestion, not it would be nice, demands rigorous honesty. So, what do we do? Well, we can pray for God's help, but we can set about watching what we say. And if we catch ourselves saying anything that is not dishonest, we can fix it right away. And I will tell you this, after having to fix it a few times, it really encouraged me to not be honest because fixing it is way harder than telling the truth in the first place. So often when people are in relapse, they're like, I don't know why I'm in relapse. I'm not sure what's going on. And the first question I ask is there any dishonesty in your life? Because dishonest people don't recover. So I think we all have to really some look, that means like we can't cheat on our taxes, we can't lie, we can't steal. We tell now that doesn't mean I'm an open book to anyone. I mean, if someone who I barely know calls me up and says, how's your sex life with your husband? I don't need to answer that. I'm allowed to say, you know what, that's personal and I don't feel comfortable talking about that with you. Okay, so it doesn't mean I have to give information to people who aren't entitled to it. But it also means that I do have to give information to people who are entitled. So that means with my sponsor, I don't need to wait for her to ask, so, did you eat anything off your food plan? Did you tell any lies? Were you nasty today? If I've done anything I shouldn't have, it's on me to say it right away. Right? So dishonesty by omission is still dishonesty, and we can't do it. Okay. So it says there are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them recover if they have the capacity to be honest. So if someone has, manic what is it called? Depression, anything like that, any of those like what they call grave emotional or mental disorders, they can recover if they have the capacity to be honest. And what that also, I just want to say a word here about people who may be taking psychiatric drugs or drugs for depression or drugs for, any kind of emotional or mental disorders. That is, as a sponsor, that is absolutely none of my business. I have heard sponsors tell people that I won't sponsor you as long as you're taking, whatever drug, because that drug is a crutch. That is dead wrong. That is not our business to mess with anyone else's medication. Okay. So I want to be really clear about that. But it is my job to make sure that my sponsees are being honest, right? They have to be honest. And I have to be honest if I want to stay in recovery. Okay. Second paragraph. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. Okay. What we used to be like. Train wrecks living on self-will. When we tell our stories, we're not really supposed to focus on our lousy childhood, all the things our parents did wrong. Because remember, there's a story in the big book, I can't remember the name of it, where the author said, I'm not the way I am because of what was done to me, but because of my reactions to what was done. My sister and I grew up in the same exact household, raised by the same parents, the same way. I was a compulsive eater. She wasn't, right? It was my selfishness and self-centeredness that did it. So it says, what we used to be like. People living on self-will. So when I tell my story, that's what I focus on, how I lived on self-will. What happened? I think it should say who happened. God happened. God happened and intervened in my life and rescued me. And what we are like now. people living surrendered, sane lives. And then it tells who can be sponsored. So it is not true that anybody who asks for a sponsor is entitled to a sponsor, right? So it says, so here's the requirements, two requirements. One, if you have decided you want what we have, what do we have? Step 12 tells us a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And that spiritual awakening or spiritual experience, as we see on page 25, is where God does for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. And I think the first thing he does is remove our food obsession. But remember, that's just his opening act. If you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then, and I say then and only then, are you ready to take certain steps? So it's two decisions we have to make. A decision, yes, I want this spiritual awakening, and yes, I will do whatever it takes to get it. That's it. Then a person can be sponsored. And by the way, when I start to sponsor someone, if someone asks me to sponsor her and she says, yes, I'm willing to go to any lengths, I don't take it at face value. And in fact, in the chapter Working with Others, it says we're not supposed to take it at face value. It says we're supposed to really prod to make sure it's true. So what I do is I have a conversation, I give her something to do, see if she calls me back. We go over that, give her something else to do. She calls me back. So by now we've had two or three conversations. And at that point, I tell her, here's like the things that I ask all my sponsees to do. Go take the night and think about it. So we've had two or three conversations. She knows what I'm going to require. She's already seen how I work. And then I can get a good idea. But I will say, even that, someone will come back and say, yes, I'm willing. I would say maybe 50% of the time, they end up not being willing anyway. So we do our best, but not everyone succeeds. And that's okay because I'm only responsible for trying to carry this message. I'm not judged by God by how many notches in my belt I have, by how many people I've taken through the steps. The only thing that God cares about is my surrender, my obedience, my trust, not, how many people I have who've recovered. Okay, so they say at some of these we balked, right? When we hear what's required, we may balk. That means our emotions don't want to. They say, we thought we could find an easier, softer way. Like, do I really have to go to these meetings? Do I really have to be honest? It says, we thought we could find an easier, softer way. What are easier, softer ways? Just relying on religion, therapy, going back to the food. Again, nothing wrong with religion or therapy. I go to church every week and I've spent years in therapy, in recovery. But that alone doesn't get us recovered. It says, we thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. We beg you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. We've tried to hold on to some old ideas like, well, I don't have to be 100% honest. If my sponsor doesn't ask me, I don't have to volunteer the information. It says the result was nil, nothing, until we let go absolutely. Remember, we deal with alcohol, with food, cunning, baffling, and powerful. That's a really weird sentence if you think about it. We've heard it so many times, we just say, oh yeah, that's great. Okay, food is an inanimate object. Cunning, baffling, and powerful. That would be like me saying my pen or my cell phone, two inanimate objects, are cunning, baffling, and powerful. It's ridiculous. What does cunning mean? Having skill, achieving a goal by like trickery. Baffling, powerful. Well, a pen or a cell phone isn't powerful. And truly, a carton of ice cream isn't powerful. So what do they mean? This illness requires a spiritual solution. So that means at its essence, we have a spiritual problem. So it's not that food or alcohol per se are cunning, baffling, and powerful, But the, I guess, spiritual force that compels us to overeat, cunning, baffling, like we are just so confused. In the morning, we say, I'm not going to pick up. And then we end up picking up. And powerful, like stronger than I am. Without help, it is too much for us. Page 59. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. So they're telling us this illness is stronger than we are because we don't have enough power. It's like I have 1 unit of power and this illness has 100 units of power. There's no way I'm going to win. But there is one who has 100 bazillion units of power. And they say that one is God, not the group, right? I may be recovered, but I can't give you any power. All I can give you is information so that you can access power. It's like if I tell you I have electricity in my house, and when I use it, I can have lights on at night. Well, that's great, but me telling you doesn't give you electricity. If you don't pay your electric bill and plug in your phone to charge, you're going to have no power. So they're telling us very clearly the answer is God. And then it's like they have a little prayer for us. May you find him now, because that's the solution, that we find God in the proper way. They say half measures availed us nothing. We all know when we were in school, you get 50% on a test, you get a zero. We stood at the turning point. So this is the turning point. We're at the point where we believe in God, right? If we've taken a second step, came to believe a power greater than ourselves, meaning God can restore us to sanity. So we believe it, but we haven't surrendered yet. Say we stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. So remember when we talked about God a few weeks ago? We back in We Agnostics, it gave us some clues about God, that God has a consciousness, he's smart, he's powerful, and he cares about me. And now here's a couple more clues about God. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. So that means if I abandon myself, surrender myself completely, not just my food, God wants all of me, then he will protect me and take care of me. What a great way to live, right? And then it says, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. So it's a program, right? We do these 12 things. We start out admitting we're powerless over food and our life is unmanageable. And then we end up with the promise of step 12. We have a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, right? What a beautiful promise. And then they tell us, like, many of us exclaimed, what an order. I can't go through with it. Like, it's hard, right? Say, don't be discouraged. Look how nice they are. They're telling us, don't be discouraged. None of us have been able to maintain perfect adherence to these principles. Notice they do not mean perfect adherence to a food plan. When they say we're not saints, I actually disagree with that. I think the founders of this program kind of were saints. Um, the point is, we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. I've heard people say when they read this line, well, I'm not binging as badly as I once was, and that's progress, not perfection. That's all that's required. That is not what they are talking about. No alcoholic could go to an AA meeting and say, I only got drunk 3 times this week instead of 6 times. That's progress, and have everyone cheer him on. They would say, sit down, you got nothing to say, right? Spiritual, they're talking about spiritual progress. So what does that mean? So that means when I get resentful, instead of, wanting to hire a hitman to get the person and staying angry for 3 weeks, maybe I'm angry for a few hours, then half an hour. Then maybe I can resolve it right away. Just resolve it quickly. And I've really found that that's happened to me. Not that I never get resentments, but I can look at my part, ask God to forgive me. Um, and if I don't have a part, I can just say, I'm not entitled to have things go my way all the time. And that's often my part. Um, we had a beautiful 2 week, 13-day trip in Europe, and we came back, and our plane got back in Atlanta at about 2:30, and our connection wasn't until 7:30. And we were through customs and all that by 3:30. And I saw, oh, there's a 5:30 flight. So went to the counter and I'm like, we have plenty of time. Can we get on the 5:30 flight? And the woman said, no, since your luggage was already checked, we can't do anything about it. You have to take the 7:30 flight. And I'm thinking, okay, on another airline, they were able to like go on their computer and get the plane clearly wasn't on the luggage wasn't on the 7:30 flight yet. So she said no. So it's just like, okay. So we waited. And again, I was up about 24 hours, exhausted. And we're sitting and waiting. But it did give me time to catch up on American Idol, which you can't watch in Europe. So that was okay. So we get on the 7:30 flight. We get home late, again, exhausted. I check on my app, where's the luggage? It had been put on the 5:30 flight. And it was there in the like luggage room. And I just sat there and I'm like, okay. And I'm like, you know what? God must have had a reason for this. Maybe if we'd got on the earlier flight, we would have get in a car accident on the way home or whatever. And I'm not going to call the airline and complain. I'm going to do nothing. I'm just going to be grateful. We got home safely. We got our luggage. We had a great trip. Everything doesn't have to go the way I want, and I'm not entitled to, airlines doing what I want. And I'll tell you, life is a lot easier this way. When things happen, it's just realizing everything that happens runs through God's hands. So, for whatever reason, I mean, I can't imagine that God just really had a vested interest in me catching up on American Idol. I don't think that was the reason. And I may not know the reason this side of heaven, but I trust God. And so I have found that the more I work this program, the more spiritual progress I get, the less resentful I am. And that is not a result of, oh, I'm older and wiser. That is just a result of surrendering my will and my life to God and letting Him do with me whatever He wants to, with my time, with my money, with my everything. Okay, so then this is actually like my favorite part of the book, one of my favorites. Our description of the compulsive eater, chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. And we cannot really proceed and surrender until we go through these ABCs. So for ourselves and for our sponsees, I think we have to be really diligent about this. A, that we were compulsive eaters and could not manage our own lives. Well, that's usually easy. If we could manage our own lives and put down the food, we wouldn't be here. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our compulsive eating. Again, we've taken a second step, a first step. So we know that. C, and here's where we get tripped up, that God could and would if He were sought. That God could remove my food obsession and He would if He were sought. So at this point, I always ask people, do you believe God exists? And if they say no, well, we've got some step 2 work to go back and do. If they say yes, okay, great. Do you believe that God has restored other people to sanity and removed their food obsession? And, they look around, they see a bunch of people who've recovered, and they say yes. Then it's like, do you believe God could do it for you if He wanted to? He may not want to, but could He if He wanted to? And, if we're honest, we have to say, well, yeah, He's God. He could. He's done it for other. He could if He wanted to. And then here's where people get tripped up. Do you believe He will for you? And here's where people say, no, He could, but He won't for me. So I talked about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but I'll just run through really quickly the 5 reasons why people think God won't for them, because it's really important that we believe He will for me personally. One, I don't deserve it. That's usually based on because I don't deserve it because I've done some really bad things, right? Like if someone's gone out and really mistreated people or stolen, we may feel we don't deserve it. Look what we've done. Two, I just don't deserve it. I'm not worthy. So that's different. That's not based on I've done some bad things. That's just based on a feeling of shame and not being worthy. Three, I've tried it so many times before and it hasn't worked. Four, it's my fault that I have this illness, right? Because it says selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of this illness. So I can't ask God for help. Like people with cancer can go to God, but not me. And five, I'm not willing to do the work. Well, to the fifth person who says, I'm not willing to do the work, I would say, you're right. No guarantees God will restore you to sanity. And I got nothing for you if you're not willing to do the work. To person number one who says, I don't deserve it because I've done some bad things, I say, you're in great company. So did all the founders of this program. That's why there's a ninth step. You get to pay back people you've stolen from. You get to mend broken relationships. So just hang in there. You'll get a chance to fix it. Most of us are person number two. I'm just not worthy. I don't deserve it. And to that person, I say, you've really got two options. You could like spend lots of money in therapy to try and have a therapist convince you you're worthy. And therapy is great for a bunch of stuff, but I don't think it helps that. And I think what helps is to say, if you look through this book, you won't find worthiness as a requirement. Only willingness is a requirement. I am not worthy, and I was never worthy for all that God did for me and continues to do for me. But fortunately for us, God doesn't require worthiness. He only requires willingness. And those of us who are moms can relate to that. When our babies were born, and they cried in the middle of the night, did they ever do something to make them worthy of us getting up and changing their diapers and feeding them in the middle of the night when we were exhausted? Well, yeah, they were cute and all, but like, no, it wasn't like, well, what can you do for me, baby? But we just loved them because we were their moms, and moms love. And if we're God's kids, He takes care of us just because He loves us. To the person who says, I've tried it so many times before and it hasn't worked, I would generally hold up my cell phone and say, I could try 100 times to take pictures this way, but I'm just pressing the on-off button and I'm not taking pictures. And if someone shows me how to take pictures and it's suddenly, oh yeah, I've been pressing the wrong button all the time, suddenly I can take pictures. And maybe someone showed me the right button a couple years ago, and I'm like, no, you say that's the right way, but I'm going to do it my way. Well, you know what? Today can be the day I decide I'm going to press the picture button. And to the person who says, well, I can't really bother God, I again pick up my cell phone and say, if I'm crossing the street and I'm looking at all the pictures on my cell phone and I get hit by a bus, am I ever going to say to the ambulance driver, don't take me to the hospital, get my broken legs fixed. It's my fault I got hit by a bus. I don't deserve it. Come on, none of us would ever do that. But we say, well, I don't want to bother God. We can bother God. It's fine. Okay, so we should get to the point where we believe that God can restore me personally to sanity, and He will if I continue to do this work. And they say only once we're convinced of that, then we are at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God, over to God, as we understood Him. Means doesn't matter if my concept of God is different than yours, but again, they're talking about God, the one who has all power. If you tell me your concept of God is a doorknob, I am going to tell you that makes no sense. Have you ever known a doorknob to restore anyone to sanity? So again, in chapter, I think it's 4, it says he can have any concept he wants, provided it makes sense. So they say, okay, what do we mean by that? And what do we do? How do I turn my will and life over to God? Requirement number one, I have to be convinced that my life run on self-will can never be a success, right? If I've taken a first step, that's pretty easy. Then it says, on that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. And then I always have my sponsees read this in the first person because it is very convicting. So I'm going to do that now. Janet tries to live by self-propulsion. Janet is like an actress who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in her own way. If if Janet's arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as Janet wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including especially Janet, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, Janet may sometimes be quite virtuous. Janet may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, Janet may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, Janet is more likely to have varied traits. What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. Janet begins to think life doesn't treat her right. Janet decides to exert herself more. Janet becomes, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit Janet. Admitting she may be somewhat at fault, Janet is sure other people are more to blame. Janet becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is Janet's basic trouble? So what's all of our basic trouble? Is Janet not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is Janet not a victim of the delusion that she can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if she only manages well? And is it not evident to all the rest of the players these are the things Janet wants? And do not her actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is Janet not, even in her best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? I would say the next time any of us get a resentment, read those two paragraphs out loud, inserting our own names in it. And boy, that will take the energy of the resentment down quite a few notches right away. So, what does all this mean that we're self seekers even when trying to be kind? It means I'm trying to get a result. So, let me give you an example. I always, had this desire that my kids, even once they left high school, went to college, got out of college, that they would continue to go to church every Sunday like I raised them. So here's the difference. If I made that my goal, and no one could say that that's a bad goal, and so now they're off, not really going to church, if I'm going to be honest. Every now and then they might, but they're not committed to going to church every Sunday. I would get angry, indignant, self-pitying because my goal wasn't being reached. And I would probably mess up my relationships with my kids by scolding them or trying to guilt them or manipulate them and, constantly telling them and asking them every Sunday, did you go to church? But that's not my goal, to get kids who go to church. My overarching uber goal in life, under which all littler goals with a small g have to fit, is to do God's will. So that means I brought up my children the same way, right? Took them to church every Sunday, talked to them about how important it is. But now I don't lose any sleep over it. I don't stress over it. I don't try to manipulate my kids. I generally don't even ask them if they went to church because my goal isn't to raise kids who go to church. My goal is to do God's will. God is not going to judge me based on, did my kids go to church? God will judge me only on my obedience to Him. So again, it is a way of living that gives us so much less stress because I don't have to worry about my kids' future. It's kind of none of my business. So now I can pray, right? I can pray like God, and my prayer actually isn't that they go to church every Sunday. It's like, please let my kids learn to center their lives around you. That's it. I pray for them. Um, and that's it. And again, it makes life so much easier. So then they continue on page 61. Our actor, meaning me, is self centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. And then they compare us to a retired person who complains about the way the world's going, a minister who sighs over other people's sins, politicians and reformers who say life would be wonderful if only other people behaved, the person who's done wrong things and says, I've been wronged, and the alcoholic, the compulsive eater who's lost all. What do we have in common? We're concerned with ourselves, our resentment, and our self pity. And then they tell us what the root of our troubles is. So I've saved you all $10,000 in therapy. Selfishness, self centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, the root. Now, remember, when we see a tree, we don't see the roots, they're underground. So the selfishness and self centeredness are underground, but we see the fruits. And what are the fruits of this illness? Resentments, fears, self pity, harms to others. Like different fruit on our tree: resentment, fear, self pity, harm to others. And they say, driven by 100 forms. See, right? The roots are underground, and then they drive us. They drive us. Fear, self delusion, self pity, self seeking. What do? We step on other people's toes, and then they want to get us back. Sometimes they hurt us. It seems that we never provoke them, but we invariably, almost always find at some time in the past, we've made decisions based on ourselves, which placed us in a position to be hurt. How many times when I was younger did I get emotionally hurt by, a whole group of like lousy boyfriends? I made decisions based on self by, dating people who were clearly inappropriate. And they say, so our troubles we think are basically of our own making. One big caveat here. If a child is molested or a person is raped, we would never ever say that that person had a part in it and their troubles were of their making, right? Sometimes there are true victims. A child who is molested, a woman who is raped is a true victim. So let's be clear about that and not, if someone comes to us with that in the fifth step and say, well, what's your part? Was your dress too short? We would never do something like that. However, as grown-ups, we do have to forgive. And in that situation, we can forgive on the basis that other people are spiritually sick. And we'll get to that when we talk about step 4. Doesn't mean we have to be in relationship with spiritually sick people who injure us. We can set boundaries, but we have to forgive for ourselves. Again, that's in 2 weeks when we do step 4. Okay, so our troubles, we think, are basically out of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the compulsive eater is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. So just because we think we're not self-will run riot doesn't mean we're not. We usually don't think so. So that's why we need to have a group of loving friends around us who will tell us the truth. And we need to really look for it. I really look for, do I have any self-will going on in any given area at any given time? Because I might. So we look for it. Above everything, we must be rid of our selfishness. Above everything. So I tell my sponsees from day one, I want them to do unselfish acts that are a self-sacrifice in order to help other people. We have to work to counter this selfishness. It says we must get rid of it or it kills us. God makes that possible. There seems no way of completely getting rid of self without his help. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we couldn't live up to them. We couldn't reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying. We had to have our own helps, have God's help. So that means even if I realize that selfishness is my problem and unselfishness is the solution, on my own, just by willpower, I can't do it. I have to have God's help. So why? Why can't I say, God, help me be unselfish? And he doesn't just answer and make me unselfish. Because remember, God is everything or else he's nothing. I have to give God my whole life. So they say, this is the how and why of it. So they're giving us the instructions. Boom, boom, boom. One, we had to quit playing God. Why? Because it's disrespectful to God? Well, it kind of is, but it doesn't work. I'm so unqualified for the job of God. Two, we decided hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. I mean, I could decide that I'm going to quit playing God and let, a therapist, a, my husband, some guru be in charge of my life. And they're saying, no, it's God. God is going to be our director. And then they describe God. He is the principal. We are his agents. I love that. That means God has work to do and I get to be an agent to help him. Like, what a great sense of purpose for all of us who were so used to saying, why am I here? I have no sense of purpose. Like, I have a sense of purpose to be like God's agent. And not in a conceited sense, like, oh, God's anointed me to do something. But again, back in chapter 4, it says, we are spearheads of God's ever advancing creation. Like, God wants me to help. But he's just not an impersonal principal with me as an impersonal agent. He is the Father, and we are his children, his beloved children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch. So think of like an arch through which we pass to freedom. So on one side, bondage to this illness, on the other side, freedom. We walk through and we decide, okay, God, I'm your girl. I'm your agent. I'm going to try and do your will as best we can. And on top of page 63, they give us the fruits of taking a third step. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer with a capital E. He's all powerful, so he gives us what we need if we do two things. Keep close to him through prayer, meditation, constantly seeking his will through my day. It's just as simple as saying, God, what would you have me do in this situation? Like in that thing with our luggage and our delayed flight. Well, God, what would you have me do? Do I call Delta? Do I rant and rave? Do I complain? No, God would have me do nothing. Just be happy I'm home, go to sleep, wake up. That's it. If we kept close to him and performed his work well. God, what do you want me to do? I came home yesterday. I felt he wanted me to do laundry. I had like 6 loads to do. I did 2. And I had a bunch of sponsees I hadn't connected with a bunch of them. That's it. Very simple. Established on such a footing where I'm just going to try and do God's will. That's it. We became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. That's a result. I couldn't tell myself, Janet, don't be self-centered, but I could seek to do God's will, and then it just starts happening automatically. We became more and more interested in seeing what we contribute to life as we felt new power flow in. Okay, this is really cool. Remember, our problem is lack of power. Step 2, we start getting a little bit of power. That's where we get our first infusion of power. As we felt new power, so now we get more power and it flows in. It's not like Star Wars, the Force waiting to be awakened in me. It's from God that flows from him into me. New power flow in, and the more God I get, the more peace of mind I get. The more I discover I can face life successfully. I become conscious of his presence. That's just an awareness like, God's really here and he really cares about me. We begin to lose our fear about today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. I don't sit there and think, oh my gosh, am I like going to go to hell? What's going to happen to me? What do I do today? What's my future going to be like when I'm 80 years old? No. We're reborn. We're on the other side of the arch. And remember, when we go through step 9, I think there's another arch we walk through, and then we're in the land of neutrality. But now we're in the land of, in the land of God. Like we're there now. We were in self-will. Now we're in God's will. And it says, now we're at step 3. Many of us said to our maker, look at that name for God, our maker, as we understood him. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. That's like, God, take all this raw material of me and build of me, like assemble it into whatever you want, and then do with me whatever you want. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do my will, right? What's going to trip me up? Self, wanting to get what I want. Take away my difficulties. Why? So that I have like a nice, easy life? That's not why we're praying it. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, because we're now in the business of wanting to be helpful, of 3 things: God's power, God's love, and God's way of life. Like when we live this way of life, we live in the presence of power and love, right? We thought well before taking this step. So we want to really make sure we believe that God can and will restore us to sanity and that we're ready, making sure we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. That's what we're doing. It says, we found it desirable to take the spiritual step with an understanding person. I always have my sponsees take this step with me. It says the wording is quite optional. I personally like to use these words because these were the words that the founders of AA did use. And remember, it says we want to thoroughly follow their path. So I personally use these words. If someone wants to change them a little, the book says we're allowed. It says, but what's important is expressing the idea, right? And remember, we can only surrender when we trust. So we want to make sure we trust God. But I think by this point, usually someone's been working the program, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, and it's like all of a sudden they're abstinent. They're not obsessing about food as much. Things are kind of working out, or they're starting to see how they could work out. They say, when we do our 3rd step, if it's honestly and humbly made, in effect, sometimes a very great one was felt at once, sometimes not. But I will tell you, when we pass through that arch, a very great effect happens in our soul, and we start getting those 3rd step promises. And that is all I have for today.